Hi everyone, welcome to Frontify's next webinar, how to scale your digital teams. And I'm really happy today to welcome Paul, who you can see on the picture as well. Hi Paul.
Hi, how are you? Are we all doing well?
I'm very well, thank you. And yeah, firstly, thanks for joining the call. And I'm hoping that we're going to get some, people joining us today to listen to our discussion and hopefully at the end contribute as well with their questions. So yeah, as I mentioned, today's Tuesday, November 13th. I'm calling you from Switzerland and Paul is calling from...
Oh, the United Kingdom.
So you're 1 hour behind me, Paul.
I am indeed, yes, and it's dark and miserable, hence my somewhat kind of gothic nighttime environment that I'm broadcasting from.
Same here, by the way. Weather's getting worse. Winter's definitely coming. Yeah, so guys, today, thanks for joining. And we basically split the webinar into 4 blocks. Obviously, the first one's going to be an introduction into the topic, bringing order to your digital chaos. Obviously, I'd like to hear Paul's side to this particular question. Then we're going to switch into more of a discussion with Paul, where we're going to focus more deeply on this book, which I'm going to come back to many times. Paul, I'm sure you recognize it.
Ooh, yes, very shiny.
Which is the story behind your digital acceleration how-to guide, which Paul wrote. And there are some many nice insights in it. And I'd like to just go over a few points and got a few questions I'd like to ask you as well. And after that, we're going to have some time to just jump into a brief demo. Obviously, today's it's not going to be a sales pitch from my side from Frontify, but I do want to kind of show you the tool and how it kind of works with the whole topic that we discussed before that with the discussion. And kind of really sum it up to summarize it into one nice big picture, if you like. And at the end, obviously, we'd like to involve you guys who are joining the call. And, your questions are really important for us, not just here at Frontify, but I'm sure Paul would also like to see what your comments are. And we should have time at the end as well to go over that.
On the basis of that picture, I'm probably some kind of magician in Vegas. That picture makes me look like some kind of cheap nightclub magician. But anyway, in actual fact, I'm a user experience consultant. I started off as a designer, a website designer back in the late 90s. Early 90s, 94. I went through the whole .com boom and bust. I was going to be a millionaire, and then suddenly I wasn't. Before I eventually set up an agency, which I ran for 13 years with a couple of colleagues. An agency called Headscape is still going strong to today. And I've worked with a huge range of clients in all kinds of different sectors, from the charity sector with charities like Doctors Without Borders. I've done a lot of work in higher education with various universities, from Oxford University to St Andrews to whoever you care to mention. And then also a lot of commercial clients as well. So I work with the likes of Puma, Shell, all kind. I'm going to see GSK very soon. So a whole variety of different clients. I've also written 5 books now. In fact, if we count yours, I think that brings me up to 6. So,
being the most important one you ever wrote, right?
Well, obviously. What's really exciting about the book that I wrote for you guys is that that's the kind of book that you could never kind of persuade a publisher to publish, right? Because it's the kind of thing that doesn't sell millions of copies, but is really, really important to kind of write about. And so it was really great that you guys were kind enough to indulge my desire to write that. I really appreciate it.
Well, we appreciate it as well, and I must say we're really happy with the outcome. And obviously, you can see that the fan illustrations just make it even more better. And
I know, I couldn't believe it. When I saw the illustrations, I was really excited. That was really cool. Sorry, I'll shut up.
Yeah, just before we start with the question discussion, Paul, based on the fact that we're talking a lot about this book, I think it makes sense that our, viewers today know a bit more about it. And maybe I just wanted to mention the chapters basically that the book encompasses. And obviously the first, chapter is kind of a more general introduction, which is kind of telling organizations how important it is to kind of bring order to your digital chaos, which is obviously, concern for all organizations, regardless of size, of sector. And then obviously working to kill waste and boost your return. So obviously we're going to focus a lot on the return part, which I think is the main goal of any organization going forward. And then your third chapter is introducing robust design principles to improve focus. So we're going to spend some time on the kind of design principles and what do you mean by design principles for any organization. From the design principles, we're going to switch to a more kind of tangible area, which I'd like to call, the design systems, which you talk a lot about, and building your, why reusability is so important, consistency, sustainability in your digital channels. And after that, we're going to, switch to kind of more of an overview, how to organize and scale up your digital offering. And obviously that comes a bit to the title that we have today, which is, how to scale your digital teams. And finally, at the end, we're going to have a wrap up where we can then kind of go over all the different questions that we had, the demo that I'm going to show you as well and introduce, and then we can kind of play it from there.
You've missed out the most important thing about the book, which is that it's free.
Do you know what? That's one of my last slides today. So
okay.
We say book, but it's actually more of an ebook, isn't it, Paul? I mean, we obviously, being a cloud-based brand management software, we recommend people to download it and not have to kind of print it, because obviously we're environmentally conscious as well.
Ooh, yes, very responsible.
Cool. So Paul, let's get started. So the story behind your digital acceleration how to guide, today's topic is how to scale your digital teams, and we're going to be seeing a lot of these funny birds here in the picture, which obviously represents the graphics in the book. But Paul, maybe we start, it's all about doing more with less. I think that's how you start with your introduction as well. Maybe you can tell us more about this and, why is this topic so important? Why is it important for organizations to know how to best and efficiently scale up their digital teams? I mean, do you have anything to comment on that?
That doing more with less bit is particularly important, I think, because so many organizations, in my experience when it comes to digital, massively understaff their digital teams. I suspect the people watching this video have experienced that they've just got, there's just too much going on, isn't there, in order to do stuff. So it all comes down to them working as efficiently as possible. And I don't think most organizations I work with are particularly good at working efficiently when it comes to digital projects. So what do I mean by that? Well, part of the problem is that the traditional project management methodology isn't very digitally friendly, if you like, right? Doesn't take into account some of the unique characteristics of digital. So, for example, a traditional project has this kind of, starts off by somebody coming up with some great idea, somebody in senior management, we want to build X or whatever. Then normally a committee is formed and a big specification is written about how we're going to deliver X. And then you go away and you deliver it, and the scope creep is the enemy, and the last thing you want to do is change and all the rest of it. And then when the project's done, you all kind of, wipe your hands a bit, walk on, go off and do the next thing. But that fails to utilize the really unique nature of digital. And there are a couple of things about digital that is so cool. For a start, the raw materials of digital are free. What you're really paying for is labor costs, right? But you don't have to pay for concrete or steel or things like that. Pixels are free.
It's right? An analogy with the building the house thing, right? Which is kind of this picture represents it. So you're saying that, as you mentioned, I think in the book, you mentioned pixels are free as opposed to a house, for example.
Absolutely. So if you're building something like a house, it makes a lot of sense that you carefully work out exactly what you're going to build before you start, right? So this birdhouse in these silly illustrations that I've got in the book, you've got to buy the wood and you've got to buy all the stuff. Now, if you get halfway through building it and going, well, this is a dumb thing to build. Why am I, that I shouldn't be doing it like this? Then all of those materials are wasted. That's not the case with digital. All that is wasted is the time that you've spent. So that's one point. The second point is, imagine if you could build a birdhouse like this, right? And then you built the birdhouse and you could get live data and live feedback about how birds were using the birdhouse. Were they staying? How long were they staying in it? How much were they landing on it? Were they feeding from it? All of those kinds of things. And so you could go, well, if I did this to the birdhouse or added that, how does that affect the data, right? But of course, you can't do that with physical projects. So with our normal physical projects, we don't take into account that live data and feedback and the fact that pixels are free. So actually, we shouldn't be building websites in this kind of linear process, but actually we should be building it in an iterative process. And that is this kind of loop that you're seeing here, right? So up front, for a start, projects start in the same wrong way. Oftentimes, digital projects begin, as I say, with someone in senior management saying, we're going to do this, which oftentimes is a hunch on their part. They've pulled it out of their arses, right? But in fact, what we should be doing is discovering upfront whether there is actually a need for what we're doing. We need to be getting to know our customers so much better than we are. And here's a question for anybody watching this right now. When was the last time you spent any time with your customers? I bet it was actually a little while ago. Now, when I ask that at conferences, the result is pretty depressing. But it's even more depressing when I then say, when was the last time your senior management team spent any time with customers? Because there's this stupid thing that the better you do with an organization, the higher you're promoted, the less you have to do with customers. So actually, you're not always ideally placed to be making decisions about the best things to build. So that's why a discovery phase is necessary up front. Before you decide to build anything or even consider whether this project is viable, you need to do your research up front. Now, once you've done that, once you've validated that the basic idea is worth doing, then you go into this cycle, right? So I think of it a bit like science, right? When you do, say if you want to come up with the cure for Alzheimer's or whatever, all right? You don't expect to get that right on day one. Oh, I've got an idea of how we're going to cure Alzheimer's, and then bang, miraculously you've cured Alzheimer's. It doesn't work like that, does it? Instead, what happens is you come up with a hypothesis about how Alzheimer's might be cured. You then form a test, right? You test whether your hypothesis is correct. You learn from that test. The chances are it's not going to be a yes, no, but there will be some promising things, some not promising things. You learn from that, form a new hypothesis, test again, and go round and round and round. And that is precisely what we can do with digital. We can build these really cheap, easy to produce, because remember, pixels are free, prototypes that then we can test, get good quality data, and then iterate upon. And we could go round and round like that, continually improving our products. And the great thing about this, and there are two great things. One is you don't end up building stuff that people don't want. The number of projects that end up costing a flipping fortune building a load of stuff that the market doesn't actually want, or they want the basic idea, but you've over-engineered it. You've provided people with more than they actually need. So it can save organizations money. But secondly, you can get to market a lot quicker because we spend so long endlessly arguing and debating about what the best approach should be, what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing. Stop it. Use data instead. It's far, far more powerful, and it will get you to a decision far, far quicker.
Makes sense, Paul. And just I noticed that the first question came in, and I think the Q&A at the end as well is obviously going to be a big part because we want people to contribute. So yeah, do not hesitate to send in your questions, and we can come back to all these slides and topics later in the presentation. So Paul, maybe as you mentioned, so what the key takings here is that efficiency is important not just for any kind of digital project, but for any organization. And the other thing I wanted to mention as well, you talk a lot about the MVP in an organization, like the minimum viable product, which you don't kind of need to develop this amazing new tool, this amazing new website, but it's a work in progress, and you can always get better and get better and better. And that's not something you could do with a traditional house, for example.
Absolutely. And that idea of minimal viable product is what I mean by not building things that people ultimately might not actually want. I think sometimes people misunderstand the idea of minimal viable product. They think it means doing everything quite shittily, at a very low quality. Well, that's got its place. That's called prototyping, right? you know, and you do that as part of that cycle that I talked about. You prototype something, you test it, but your minimal viable product is what you launch, what you go public with, and that needs to be very polished. But that doesn't mean you need to say, if you were, you know, rolling out a load of features, you only need to polish one feature really well and just launch that one feature rather than everything. So it's not about doing things to a poor quality. It's about being very narrow and focused about what you're going to put out in the world to begin with. So the example I give is of creating a park, right, or a garden, you know, a public garden. So initially, with a park, you would just, you know, you'd launch your park, which would be just some grass and some trees and fairly basic stuff. Then what you would do is you would observe people. Where do they walk in the park? Well, that's where we're going to lay the paths. We're going to observe them and learn from their behavior. We also listen to them. Maybe they moan about the fact that it's not very colorful in the park. So we'll add some plants. We'll respond. We'll add a new feature in. You know, it might be that the organization wants to attract more, you know, realize they want to attract more old people to the park. Yep. So they adapt the park to meet changing business requirements by adding benches in so people can sit down. So that's really what I mean by minimal viable product.
And that's, I mean, that's exactly what, that's because that's kind of it's a fancy word, isn't it? You hear it a lot. We hear it a lot here at Frontify as well, if I'm honest, with our product team. But I think that's a great way of kind of, you know, going from that part to the next question. And I think, you know, digital projects, you know, if you're talking about MVPs and efficiency is key, and etc., less waste, no clutter, as you like to call it. Obviously, that's going to reduce your cost of development. You mentioned the time of to market is going to be fast. Obviously, any kind of digital project can also be accelerated in that respect. You're going to create a desirable product. You're going to create, you know, people are going to identify to that project, to that organization in the market. And that's kind of where the analogy between, I like to call, between the brand, the digital channels that you mentioned before, and the brand is there. And that's one of the reasons as well, Paul, why we thought today it would be a great topic, you know, discussing how to scale up your digital team. But at the end of the day, you know, behind any organization, behind any project which is going to generate value, behind any, you know, things within an organization that are happening, it's going to be the brand that's going to be there. It's going to be the front of the organization, but it's also what stands at the back of the organization. And maybe the digital project is more like a, you know, the lowest common denominator, as we say in math, maybe. Whereas the brand is actually the big picture. And, you know, this is also one of my reasons why I wanted to introduce it to the topic today. And there's one, you know, statement which I wanted to ask you, Paul, and you know, this is more kind of from a Frontify to you with a lot of experience in the market and also being, you know, external and not part of Frontify. But we like to say that, you know, powerful brand, and obviously behind the brand, there's a powerful brand management tool that can help us make decisions that build a consistent customer experience, a customer journey. And, you know, we take examples a lot. We hear a lot about, you know, Apple stores or IKEA shops, et cetera, et cetera. People identify with those brands. And at the end of the day, digital projects are kind of the same if they're going to, you know, be long-term and be part of an organization.
What's really interesting about what you said there is that brand isn't what it was, right? It's changed. Digital, I think, has changed brand quite considerably, because brand always used to be how a company presented itself to the world. You know, the tone of voice that it used, the design that it used, and it is absolutely still that, right? But there's deeper layers to that now. In terms of brand really isn't just what you say about yourself to the world, but it's what your customers say about you to one another, right? And that's quite a scary thought, that your customers have as much influence in shaping your brand identity as you do. And so where that then gets really interesting is that customer service and customer experience become an integral part of brand management and brand identity. And that means that we have to be so much more on the ball in terms of how we actively manage our brand, how we talk about ourselves, how we present ourselves to the world, and how we interact with our customers to ensure that there's not inconsistency that goes on there. It can be simple little things, right? So I remember once that I bought an iPad, right? And it had some cellular connectivity problems on it. right? You know, when I talked to Apple, I got this very consistent experience of them telling me, you know, what the problems could be, how I could go about solving these problems, everything that they were saying across, whether I was talking on social media, on the website, you know, on anything else, I was getting the same message, right? Turned out the problem was actually at my cellular provider's end. And in that situation, I got totally different reactions in different platforms. So the website didn't mention anything about the problem at all. When I phoned them up, I was told that the problem was at Apple's end and not at my end. And when I mentioned it on social media, when I ranted uncontrollably on social media, they gave me an instant fix. There was no consistency in the way that I was being communicated with. And okay, that's a consistency in kind of overall experience, but that applies at kind of every level, from consistency about how your brand is used, consistency about the language that you use on your website. You know, there's such
what you mentioned, identity. I mean, at the end of the day, it's the identity that an organization has, right? And I think, you know, I'd like to switch into the next question, because I think it kind of covers more the next question. It's you make the analogy of kind of the compass. You know, each organization needs kind of a design principles which they stick to and they're going to promote and push in the future, but they've got to be based on solid foundations. And maybe coming back to your story of the brand, Paul, you know, why are design principles in that maybe example also so crucial and important?
Okay, so let's first of all clarify what I mean by design principles. Design principles are like a framework within which you operate, or a compass, as I use in the book, that points your direction that you're going in, right? So some examples of your design principles might be things like do the hard work to make it simple for the end user, right? Or it might be make decisions with data, right? So they're not specifics, right? They frame the projects that you do and the decisions that you're making within the project. So, for example, it might dictate how something like whether or not you use something like capture on your website. Right? Oh, we've got this problem with spam. You know, the developers go, well, let's shove capture on the website. Oh, but is that doing the hard work to make it simple for the user? The answer is no. So therefore, it's clashing with your design principles and you need to address it. But design principles can also be brand related as well. It can be talking about how we talk to our customers, how we interact with them. You know, Nordstrom in the US, you know, they've got these underlying principles in terms of how they operate in store. So they will actually recommend a competitor if that competitor can deliver, you know, a particular product in a better way than them, right? And that's part of their underlying culture, their underlying principles, and it's what differentiates them in the marketplace, right? And differentiation is obviously key to brand identity. Right?
Exactly, that's what defines the culture of an organization. It's what people, you know, it's the emotional connection that people have with an organization. At the end of the day, it's going to be the brand which is going to profit or at least suffer from it as a result.
I mean, of course, the problem is that design principles and design thinking and design systems and all of these things that are flying around at the moment have all become a little bit buzzwordy, haven't they? But underneath all of that kind of hype, you know, some really solid principles that I think we all need to be taking account of. And it's not difficult or challenging to create a set of design principles. You know, it's part of something bigger, isn't it? It's part of this, you know, your design principles are part of this kind of ecosystem of design, a design system.
This is kind of the slide you're referring to, right, which is kind of the next kind of slide we prepared, but it's also based on the book. And I think you're right, you know, design principles is part of a larger picture where, you know, all these different elements kind of intertwine and it's got to work together as going forward, basically.
I'm loving the way you're keeping me on track with these slides. Like, good.
At the end, we'd love to spend some time with some of our, you know, audience asking questions. I have a lot of questions to ask you as well, but I think I've got too short with my questions and let other people talk.
No. It's me. I talk too much. Yeah. So a design system, something like design principles, as you can see here, is just one part of this overall design system that provides this framework that defines your brand, defines your culture, defines how you approach projects. It's all interconnected. So you could have, as part of your design system, you have your design principles, you have your content guide, which has got a lot of your brand type stuff, of your tone of voice, how you approach people. Then you've also got these pattern libraries, these UI components of how are we going to present a consistent user experience to users as they interact with our mobile app, with our desktop site, with our back-end systems, etc. And then finally, the final piece of the component that people don't really talk about that much is this idea of a service manual. Now, a service manual is where you have your governance, your policies and procedures, so that's how you avoid scenarios like a passenger getting pulled off of a United Airlines flight and tasered, right? Because that isn't going to be good for their brand identity. So they didn't have governance frameworks in place to prevent that kind of thing. But equally, it would stop problems like the problem I had with my iPad, where basically different departments are managing different parts of the experience, right? So your service manual helps create policies and governance and procedures that prevent all that. So those things together, that design system, all of those things together, that is what shapes your brand identity.
Mm-hmm. And that should be a process which is, should be straightforward, should be easy, should be, things like accessibility, maintenance, centralization of assets, having the guarantee that everything is up to date. Should be. Exactly. Yeah. And obviously, that's kind of, where we come from as an organization as well. And that's where obviously you can see now, our audience is seeing that we're coming to a point now where we're going to kind of, reach this focal point where, going from the design systems, there are tools out there that really help organizations contribute to a good branding, a clear UI, and making sure that everyone's happy and everyone, not just internal employees who are using the assets, be it designers or, front-end developers, but also obviously at the end of the day, people who are actually buying and consuming that information from a customer perspective.
The problem is that this is all very good and easy in principle. Yes, of course it's sensible to have all of these things, but making it a reality can be frustratingly hard sometimes. If you just take something like creating consistency in your UI components, in your design library, your pattern library. There's all kinds of problems around that. It makes a lot of sense in principle, but ensuring consistency across a large organization with multiple stakeholders all updating a website at the same time can be really difficult. You have people leave and come and go with an organization. That creates problems. You've also got different components that have been designed by different people across different parts of the organization, right? So actually you need to bring all of those kinds of things together into a consistent place. So a great example of this is the BBC Global Experience language, right? GEL, they call it. And that's got a central repository where all of the UI components across the entire organization are all kept in the same place. So if somebody updates it in one place, then it's updated in the central repository and then rolled out across everywhere. Mm-hmm. Now, this often scares, in my experience, marketing and brand people, because in larger organizations, you have people who are starting going, well, this product has got a different brand and a different audience to this product. So do we want consistency, right? Well, this brings me back to when I used to work for the National Trust years and years ago. We had this philosophy, which was uniformity but not conformity. Right? So you can create a unified experience without it necessarily being a consistent one. And the BBC is a great example of this. If you look at the BBC News website and then look at the BBC Sports website and then look at CBBC, which is their kids site, or any of the rest, they all visually have got very different tones of voice. They've got very different color schemes, imagery, etc. But underpinning that is the same global experience language.
And I think that's something really important, right? This is the whole point of having this a consistent brand, consistent digital channels, making sure that, whoever's working on a project, and a digital project for any kind of digital channel, that everything's, you know, even though it's got a different tone of voice because one's going to be, you know, addressing maybe children and the other one's going to be addressing maybe more of a science community. But at the end of the day, you know, BBC is a great example because it's so complex as an organization, but it's important that whatever they do, and obviously they're becoming more and more digital as well, in a great way. It's got to be, you know, sitting on solid foundations, which again comes back to how design systems and maybe this example here, Paul, as well, we talk a lot about reusability, and that's something we encourage, especially when we think of UI components, you know.
Yeah.
Reusing is also a way of guaranteeing consistency for an organization, right? It's not just a question of saving money, not having to reinvent a wheel every time you kickstart a new project, but it's also, you know, if you're reusing buttons and headers and your websites and apps are starting to look similar, or they should look similar, then you're also going to contribute to that, you know, brand strength, if you like, in the future, and that's kind
of not just from the point of view of we want to project a consistent brand image, but users want consistency. They like familiarity. They like things to work in the same way. So actually, it's facilitating user needs as well as organizational needs. So that's what makes it, you know, so good. But the trouble is, all of this is good in principle. The practice of it can prove more challenging, which I think is what you're going to come on to next, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. That's my keyboard is freezing up for some reason. But yeah, I mean, this is actually great. Also a way to kind of then jump into demo. But and I hope you like this slide, Paul. I hope it's not too cheeky. But it's, you mentioned before the difference between.
Which am I? So I'm the tall, spindly one, and you're the short, fat one.
Short, fat one, yeah. That's me.
But I'm also the one with a really big mouth. Yeah.
Mine is not that small either, Paul, by the way.
Yeah, no, that's true.
So yeah, I mean, reusability is really important. I'm going to come back to that in a minute. You know, why is it important to reuse content? Also, encourage, make easily shared. It should be accessible by a lot of, you know, different users, and there's a lot of cost benefits attributed to it as well going forward, and time benefits and maintenance is also going to, you know, lead to less cost, etc., etc. But this question here, maybe, Paul, is, you know, if you do have these design systems which you encourage your users to use, aren't you also affecting potentially designers who feel a bit more constrained in their kind of freedom to create, which is kind of at the end of the day their responsibility in their job?
Yeah. Okay, there's kind of two aspects to that. You're right that a big challenge is getting people on board with whatever design system that you're creating. And there are two. The harsh bit of me says, right, that a design is working within constraints. That is what good design is. It's all about operating within constraints. But as somebody who for a while worked at IBM as a junior designer and had things foisted upon me from America, I remember all too vividly how much that annoyed me. Now, the fundamental problem in situations like that is that it's all a little bit opaque and unapproachable. Mm-hmm. So I didn't get my say in it. I wasn't actively involved with it. In my opinion, a good design system, the best design system, I should be able to go to a central repository. I should be able to see the design components that are there. I potentially should be able to contribute to those design components that are there. I should be able to comment on them. I should be able to provide feedback to it. I, as a junior designer, should be just as actively as engaged as anybody else. The problem comes with the adoption of design systems when they're enforced top down. And there's a lack of consideration to things like regional considerations or different brand identities, etc. A good design system should be a collaborative, open design system that everybody can contribute to.
Mm-hmm. And it's all, at the end of the day, it's making it, you know, it's facilitating everyone's job on a daily basis, not just from a, you know, designer, but also for sales, also for, you know, HR and anyone who kind of needs that information, that content, and wants to share it and make sure that, you know,
and absolutely. And in some ways, I think, and making that stuff easily available is so important because, let's be honest, oftentimes, you know, all of this kind of collateral gets buried on an intranet somewhere. And as I like to say, you know, intranet is where content goes to die. You know, and actually you want to make it a lot more accessible than that. otherwise people aren't going to use it. And that's actually how I first came across Frontify, was this desperation to find a tool which kind of presented all of this stuff in a better way.
Well, that's great that you say that, because obviously I was going to ask you that question at the start, how you came across Frontify. Obviously people assume that you've written a book, obviously we've been mentioned it as well. So obviously there's some sort of relationship going on there. But Paul, I know we're running running out of time here, and I'm trying to run a Swiss clock here on my side.
Right, now you go for it.
Our audience is still happy to be here, and obviously, we talk a lot about different theories and how important different things are. But I think, sometimes actions speak louder than words, and it's all about showing a tool as well. So basically, based on what we've said now and all the different elements, I'd like to kind of maybe finalize the discussion round, if you like, with this example here, which again, Paul, I'm sure you recognize it comes from where, any organization, regardless of size, of where you're active, you're going to have different digital channels, and those digital channels are becoming more growing, and there's more and more people who are viewing them. And if they're not, then that means that you're doing something wrong. So it goes back to the whole iteration process, which you mentioned before. But there's different ways of working, and Google, I think, are a great example of that. They have so many different apps, and they've got the Gmail, they've got all the different tools that they use, and they kind of do look similar. And it's a bit like the BBC, and it is possible if you're making sure that everyone's basically being fed the information from one kind of single source of truth, you call it, and that's kind of where, an important, an effective, efficient brand management platform is important. And on the left, it's a bit of the same example, but you can see that different, channels, different maybe agencies or different teams within an organization building different and maintaining different channels, and don't always have access to the same information. And that leads to kind of inconsistency. And it also, at the end of the day, it does reduce and weaken a brand and a brand's identity. And that's obviously something that no one really wants. And maybe based on that, Paul, I'd like to switch to a quick demo. And
because there's loads of stuff that I want to see about how this works.
Exactly. No, obviously, I'm checking the time, and we have 15 minutes left with the wrap up at the end. So I'm going to really kind of give you a bit of a glimpse of what's possible, and how, Frontify kind of tries to overcome these different problems, and how we try and help our clients on a daily basis overcome all their branding challenges. And it's also a question of being more consistent, but it's also being, easily shared with people, making sure that everyone has access to what they need, and not having to kind of Google stuff, Google logos online, which is something we hear a lot here at Frontify. But it should be available for everyone. It should have a clean UI, and it should be really kind of user-friendly. And that's how it kind of Frontify is built. We like to call it, the single source of truth, build powerful brand experiences, which is kind of our motto. And how Frontify is built is, and that comes maybe back to that slide, Paul, we saw before with the design systems, but all those different elements have to interact together. And at the end of the day, it's not a sum of a few elements, but the big picture is going to be bigger than that, because there's a lot of overlapping, and everything works together. And so you're going to be managing your guidelines, where you're storing your logos, your typographies, your colors, things that people would recognize and assimilates to your brand. But beside that, you've also got to have an area which is going to be kind of managed by your developers, where you can get all your components. You're going to have your media library, where you're storing all your pictures and videos, which is usually being managed by, the marketing teams, et cetera, et cetera. So it's also a question of centralizing and consolidating all that information on one platform. And that's kind of what Frontify does. And maybe quickly, so that Frontify, we also have a publisher, which I'm not going to talk about tonight, because we're having our next webinar will be focusing on the publisher and the workspace, obviously, which is the important part, which is where you can collaborate. It's not just a question of storing information somewhere, but it's also making sure that people are working together in a kind of a living document, as I like to call it.
And that's the key. That's the bit that really excites me, that the idea of not just storing design assets, but creating them collaboratively. Sorry, Ed, carry on.
Sorry, no, absolutely. And so the first thing is, and based on the time, I'd like to just walk you through Frontify and how it looks. And I'm sure some of you who've joined the call today recognize this, and they're like thinking, okay, but how does everything work together? So the first thing you've seen here is kind of my, cover page, if you like. And we again, this depends on use case, as you mentioned. It depends how organizations want people to experience it. But you can kind of separate your guidelines from your UI code, which is kind of the pattern library part, from your media library, which is your traditional DAM space. And obviously you could add more elements here. And you've always got this kind of nice looking brand world, which is kind of really puts people into this experience, this mood, which kind of they then start assimilating with the organization. And I think it's not just a question of selling your brand externally to your clients, but it's also making sure that all your employees and agencies kind of, read off the same page and speak the same language, basically. And what we have here basically, and again, we welcome anyone to trial the tool, to give it a bit of a test and see if you like it. But what I've done here, and by the way, this is our mono brand. Paul, you might not recognize this brand because it's our own in-house demo brand that we like to use for webinars. So, and the other thing is, obviously, we like to show it because, it's been designed in a nice way, and it's got different elements, and it's got the areas like the logos where you can store your logos in the different formats. You've got the different variations. You've got, the different colors. We talked about the safe areas on your logo. Talking about colors, you can also have your different color palettes here,
nice.
Color systems, everything centralized. You can download your swatches and open them up in your different design tools, guaranteeing that all the colors are migrated properly. You've got the different typographies, etc. For example, how you're using your fonts, etc., etc. And all these things kind of work together. And you mentioned it before, and I think it's a really important element to show, and especially today, because we talked a lot about the digital and making sure that your websites, etc., are working together. So this is kind of what we talk about when we talk about, what we talk about when we discuss the pattern library, the UI components part, which are also, it's also important that you share them within your guidelines and not just keep them separate and keep them in an area which is just managed by developers. But it's a question of bringing everyone to the same table and making sure that everyone can contribute this living document, which is the brand space, which is the brand world, which is the brand identity, and making sure that that's communicated outwards as well.
And that helps the working relationship between developers and marketing people, which normally sucks.
Well, again, I don't have time to show you everything here, but obviously, coming back to projects as well, you've also got different elements, like you can build your workspaces and, publishing, which would come to the publisher I showed you before. We've got redesigns. So you can actually build your kind of bubble and involve your different users. It could be the designer and a developer and some sort of sales guy, bring them into it, and then start collaborating there as well. And just coming back quickly to the UI, which is obviously today the most relevant part. But it's not just a question of having your buttons here, but it's also a question of being able to show them to different users and see how they respond in different apps.
Ooh,
tablet, this would be a smartphone. Then it's also a question of making sure that when your search bar is going to be the same. If I type Paul in here, it's going to be responsive as well. You've got your main navigation. If you scroll over it, you can see that it changes color. So it's really kind of showing people and showing users that information is available, and why reinvent something. Just make sure we encourage people to reuse them. And that's what we come back to when we discussed before the importance of reusability. It also makes it easier and more consistent over time.
That is so sweet. That just makes life so much easier.
Well, the other thing is obviously, people who are watching this, we're more than happy to set you guys up with a trial so that you really can kind of test it. And, user management is also very precise. You can involve people with different roles. You can restrict areas. You've got the analytics tool, which is obviously really important to see how well your tool's performing. You can really do a lot, and you can also make it public if you wanted to, so that then you can start sharing your platform with as many people as you like. Regardless of who it is, but you could also keep it closed and then start sharing it with as many people.
I tell you, that's so good if you're an external agency. I mean, I ran an agency for 13 years, and when you go to work with these companies, and it's like you want to mock stuff up, and you go to them, oh, can you send me some images? And they send you this kind of Dropbox link with a few dodgy images in, or how have you done this UI component? And it's just all over the place. It's horrible.
Yeah. And Paul, the other thing is obviously I can do that after, but I can also, if I wanted to invite you, for example, I'd put in your address here and just assign you as a different role. And obviously, if I wanted to work with you on a project, we could also assign you as an owner. And what we can also do is limit temporarily. So when you start involving freelancers, for example, then you can also determine that before you even invite people. But we are running out of time, so I'm going to switch back to our presentation, Paul, and I would like to kind of lead to the next topic, which I'm just going to click on this again. There you go. You recognize this slide. This should have been my slide from before, sorry, no time. I would like to come to the different questions, and I do see that there are questions which have come in here, and I got them here from my colleague, and maybe this is a question more for us at Frontify. But it's, actually this would be more question for you, Paul. Design systems, what stakeholders are actually using them beyond designers, and how does that, can you tell us more about that part? Because
I think
individually.
Loads of people should be using design systems. If you're talking about design systems in the broadest terms, so you're not just talking about pattern library, which is the UI components bit. If you're looking about the whole collective, you know, that should obviously designers are going to use it. Obviously developers are going to use it from the, you know, from what you were just seeing on the Frontify demo. But then there's also marketers are going to want to use it because they're going to want to get to those marketing collateral material, the images, that kind of stuff. But you should also have a content style guide in that. So, you know, what tone of voice do we use? You know, how do we refer to people in different situations? If you want to see a really great example of a voice and tone guide, go to voiceandtone.com, and that's MailChimp's version of it. And it's a lot more than we spell things in this way. It's how do we address users in this kind of situation?
And it's a collaboration of a lot of different people working together with the same kind of goal in mind, right?
Yeah, anybody that is involved in the creation of content or is putting stuff out into the world needs to be using a platform like this. It's not just a developer or designer tool by any means.
Yeah. There's a quick there's one question I did just scroll over it very, very quickly at the media library part, which is our digital assets. And obviously, you know, I did show you just pictures there, but obviously someone's asking if you can also store and manage other formats or document formats. Then obviously you can upload, you know, videos, but you could also upload PDFs of newsletters. You could upload logos if you wanted to. So there's no restriction in terms of format, and that's just something I thought I'd quickly mention.
Can I make a suggestion of something else you might want to put in your media library? Yeah. Is screen captures of or testimonials of things that people say on social media. You could put a load of user research data somewhere like that in order to keep all of that kind of information together as well, because that's really useful to have. Which will do,
and then obviously cover the social media part as well. And actually that's also a part which also overlaps with our publisher, which I haven't showed you today because we're going to be hosting a next webinar as well. Paul, maybe one question quickly. Paul, we talked about, you know, how to scale up your digital teams, and here is being asked, you know, how does the size of the company affect that? I mean, is it going to be, it's obviously going to be more complex in a large organization to scale up your digital teams, or do you think if the design systems are there and they're strong and they're not too diluted, but they're also not too strict, you're going to be able to kind of manage that and scale it up as easily as if it was a small organization of 50 people?
Yeah, I mean, as easily is an exaggeration, but it's certainly a lot easier if you've got a good design system in place. If you've got firm foundations in place, then you're going to find scaling up a lot easier. But is it going to be as easy as if you just got 50 people? No, of course it's not.
I'm being idealistic, yeah. I'm being idealistic, Paul. But obviously, a strong UI and a strong, you know, design system is gonna help any organization.
Mate, getting people on board, you know, onboarding is one of the hardest things to do with new staff. And if you're recruiting at a rate of knots, it's a load easier if you've got a tool set up with everything documented. The trouble is we tend to be rubbish at documentation. It's the last thing we bother with. But if you want to build quickly, it's one of the most important things.
And and building quickly in a structured manner is obviously important. Otherwise, you're going to reach, you know, it's going to grow organically, and after 6 months, someone's going to.
You've got all this legacy and
responsibility, and that's why this single source of truth, making sure that you have your assets always available and always up to date, and it's kind of managed centrally, so you're not going to have different silos of activity there. Is also important. And there are a few more questions, but we are definitely running on time. I'm just going to answer the last one here because that comes back to the tool we saw before. You know, if organization, we're already using brand guidelines and they're in place, but sometimes it's hard for an organization to sell those guidelines internally because, you know, I'd say historically it's always been a really kind of a dry, boring, static PDF with a few logos and stuff and usually out of date. But if you kind of really build this experience, make sure that you involve all the different, you know, the UI components, the developers, designers, making sure that everyone's at the same, you know, at the same table, you know, on the same page. And you kind of build it in this nice brand worldy way with the cover page, et cetera, et cetera. You're also going to kind of encourage people to view it at more like a, you know, like a newspaper, coming back to this cover page, I like to say to some clients. But if you kind of manage that in a nice way and kind of add topics on a weekly basis and inform people of the changes, then people are not going to have just be force-fed the information from the brand managers, but they're actually going to start taking an interest in that, and that's also going to spread this culture and all these brand values within the organization and build a strong identity. But again, this is an all nice talk, and you know, time has run out. It's been 50 minutes and nearly up, Paul, which is...
We knew it would be. We knew that we would talk too much.
What I'd like to do, Paul, is just maybe in 2 minutes, just summarise us again based on everything we discussed. Give us a bit of a wrap up of what we discussed and why is it important to bring your brand into the 21st century. And I think I actually wrote it down here, and I did take some notes just to make sure that we're going to stick to a thread here. But you mentioned a lot, slow down to speed up in your last chapter of your book, and I think that's kind of what your wrap up is going to be about, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that was what I was intimating at a minute ago, was that, we can be so busy producing the next project, the next thing, that we don't ever stop long enough to put a framework in place to make informed, good decisions as we go, and to give us the tools that we need to do our job effectively. So, in a world where consistency of brand, consistency of approach is so important, you've got to have that framework in place. Otherwise, you're either going to be faced with some major PR disaster at some point, or alternatively, you're going to find yourself slower than the competition, because
it's going to be a deal breaker for any organization. I mean, the digital world is quite ruthless. If you're going to start missing the train, and you're going to, your competitors are kind of outgrow you and outplay you, which is something that everyone wants to avoid. And that's why, again, digital is so important, digital transformation, but also making sure that everything you do, everything you sell, everything you promote and communicate is sharp, is nice, is kind of, I like to use the word sexy, but it's got to be appealing as well, so that people really identify with everything going out from an organization, from within the different digital channels. Paul, and I know we talked about this, and I like to recommend it again, but this is going to be one of my last slides. I know we're just over time, so I'm going to cut it short. But guys, if you like the presentation, you like the discussion, you would like to learn more about the different topics we discussed, and obviously there were many more that we didn't really mention today. We've got just go onto our website, frontify.com/book/digital acceleration, and then you can download your free copy of the ebook, where you can then finish all the different chapters that we might not have gone through it into that much depth because of our time restrictions. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, just before we finish, we do have some upcoming webinars which will be coming for you guys interested in our latest templating tool, our publisher as we call it. We're going to be showcasing you how it works, and how you can use it within your organization, and how it can facilitate and simplify your daily routine. And on the 22nd, so that's on the 4th of December, on the 22nd of January, we're going to have another Frontify from A to Z, for people to really get a quick overview of all the different tools, and how the platform, how this cloud-based brand management platform, which Frontify works, and how it could potentially help you going forward. And Paul, and obviously the last thing, and probably the most important one for me today, is thanks so much for joining the webinar. It's been really interesting, some great insights. It would have been nice to have another 15 minutes, because I had a few more questions to ask you then. I'm sure our viewers did as well. Guys who watching today, don't hesitate to write to me or to Paul, and we'll make sure to get back to you on a bilateral level, and make sure we can answer your question. As I said, sign up for a trial if you're interested, and download the ebook to learn more about the different topics that we discussed today. So Paul,
thank you.
Thanks a lot, and guys, stay tuned and speak soon. See ya.
Bye.
Bye-bye.